Live from America's cornerstone of high-tech distribution, powered by Intelligence. This is the Tech Table, brought to you by C&E Advanced Technologies. This is your look into what's trending in tech. And now here's your host, Jay Swank.
All right. Well, thank you. Today's episode is going to deal with obsolescence in the factory. But before I dive into that, I am joined today, way off in the west, out by Evansville, Howard Wong, one of the automation specialists for C&E, and also joined by just south of Indy, still from Indiana, Kevin Young is a motion specialist for C&E, predates me. I'm the technical resources manager here for C&E. And then the other voice that you are going to hear off and on is our producer, Jeremy Foltz, and he's the digital marketing assistant. So that's the people. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in where this conversation goes today. I know we at different times have had different conversations about dealing with customer scenarios involving obsolescence in the factory. And there's always some unique perspectives and situations. And frankly, this topic seemed well timed for me. And the reason I picked it was due to all this COVID mess, a lot of people have been home and some factory lines have been shut down for the first time in a very, very long time. For me, as a motion specialist, I was always worried about that drive that's been running just fine for 15 years. And then what happens the one day you turned it off, and will it come back on? It's always a fingers crossed moment. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure we have many customers of ours out there that are having similar fears and or are dealing with those scenarios themselves. It's also interesting to me that when you stop and think about technology and the curve with things changing, how many can say that they have a phone in their pocket or sitting on their desk next to them that's more than 2.5 years old? Chances are not very many. If you open that up even 6 months to a year, I bet that number goes down into a very small percentage of people. I'll go a step further. How many of us are driving a car that's more than 5 years old? At least relying on that car to get us back and forth to work and be that reliable transportation. We may have a car that's older than that, right? I know Kevin's a car guy. I've had cars. I've got some that, came before time, but I don't rely on it to get me around. Nonetheless, regularly we see and have customers with equipment or hear of scenarios that we're trying to help customers with where we have hardware in a facility running a technical line, and sometimes that line is something that is the life of a facility, and the equipment keeping it going is 30 years old. So with that, I guess I would say, from your perspective, either one of you, is it an issue or am I in a bubble? Is it just something that I'm seeing?
Kevin, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. You say, is it an issue? And that's probably the first thing that crosses my mind when I walk into a facility and I look at a new panel and it's clean, all the wires are where they're supposed to be, and I observe some hardware in the panel that I recognize to maybe be a generation old. So part of, is it an issue? I'm going to say, does everybody know the issue at hand? Even new stuff, you should question, okay, brand new stuff, where is it in the life cycle, and what concern should I have about spares and that kind of thing? So that's the first thing crosses my mind is, does everybody who should know where it is in the life cycle know what's on the floor, know what's back in the spares area, that kind of thing? What is the awareness?
Yeah. I agree with Kevin. Sometimes I feel like I'm the grim reaper when I visit a plant. I walk around and I see things and I say, hey, that's going to die soon. That's going away soon. And some people look at me like, are you kidding me? I just bought this like 2 or 3 years ago. And oftentimes, OEMs, a lot of times, they may not use the very latest and greatest of hardware because they may make 100 machines a year and they don't want to change their design or their hardware components that they're going to use. And they buy all that stuff in mass one time. But by the time they sell that machine to you, you get it in, you get it installed, it could already have some product that is starting to tail out.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but I was a part of a facility that did that very thing. Back in some time, we had a machine that was designed. It had 11 axes of motion. It was a tremendous effort to do the engineering and get the motion right on it. And then the drive components were announced for phase out. And we sort of buried our head in the sand. Ostriches don't really do that, but everybody says that. We sort of buried our head in the sand to the issue for a series of years. And then when we started to see the price increase a little bit on that hardware, still rather than investing in the engineering, and again, I really am ashamed to admit it, what we did is we bought $300,000 worth of those drives and kind of cleared out some shelves so that we could produce machines for an additional 3 years without having to invest that engineering. And shame, if our customers weren't pushing us, and really no one did. It was just sort of the spec hardware. I was absolutely a part of a machine builder that put machines that were obsolete, brand new, into a new facility. And I think both of you kind of touched on that. And Howard, you're saying, man, I know you just bought it 3 years ago, but it sounds like that doesn't mean that there's not obsolescence. And yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's the nature of the beast, of course, just because, see, I look at it, we're always on the leading edge. We're in a great position, especially working with C&E, that the vendors tell us, here's what's coming next. So we know about what's coming next before a lot of people do. So when we see something, we already heard what's coming next, but yet product on the floor, it's still got a good long life. So there's always, everything's relative to your point of view, of course. So supporting the things on the floor, that's, even though it's brand new, been in, we know the next one has been designed and is ready to come out for sale, if you will. Supporting what's on the floor is number one focus. So to that end, even the old stuff, there's always the thought process, where is it in the lifespan? Okay, we know everything is at some point of cancellation, not for years and years and years, or not for 5 years, or it's 2 years out. So there's a priority that needs to be evaluated, I think, and then come up with what are we going to do about that. So that's an advantage, that we know what's new and walk in and kind of take a look at what's on the floor. We see things from a different angle on how big of a deal it is, but we also know the other side. We know we can get support pretty deep into our support avenues to help support what's on the floor too.
I think we also have the advantage too that we have the experience to identify, hey, this is a critical spare. This is a dime a dozen spare. We can work around it if something happens. But there's some things, if you can't get another one, it's going to be an engineering process to get it replaced. It's not going to be a drop-in replacement.
So how receptive do you think the average customer is? I know when I was walking in the shoes of a specialist and out talking to customers, I would say it varied, but many customers sort of had, I felt like they weren't hearing my concern as a concern for their facility, as a partner. Mm-hmm. That we really want to be. I know part of the core values of C&E is that we see ourselves as a partner, and we really try to treat your facility like it's our facility. But nonetheless, everyone's inundated with salespeople, right? And I think sometimes people feel like we're just trying to sell parts or we're looking for that next thing. Or do you feel like there's traction there, or do you feel like your effort in identifying those almost mitigates it?
I think again it does vary. Some of the pushback I do get from customers is they say, "Hey, I don't feel the need. I don't feel obsolescence is an issue with me because I feel like, oh, I can probably go on eBay and get stuff or whatever." And I get the argument too. Hey, I still have a car from the '80s. I maintain it. I still drive it. It still runs. It gets me from point A to point B. The problem with technology, that's not a good analogy, because the problem with technology is that unlike a car still runs in the same kind of gas that you used to be able to get in the 80s. Technology isn't running on the same kind of fuel that you could get in the 80s. There's certain pieces of software that will not run on Windows 7 or Windows 10, and you still need that one weird piece of software in order to program some device from the 80s. That's the problem too.
Yeah. And then I've seen the scenario. There's so much confidence. Let's say, I'm just being real generic here, at a maintenance supervisor level. There's so much confidence in his guys that know the ins and outs of the old equipment on the floor, that every time a problem comes up, his guys go out and make it go away. And there's a comfort in that. And there's a comfort with that level of technology. They've known it. They make it work. But you go talk to the guy who went and made it work, who was there Saturday night until 1 a.m. and had to go find some old card and had to find parameters and old software to download onto it and made it work again. It's a different story on how excited they are about introducing new hardware. So I think part of it is understanding when things break as they get older, the effort that it really takes to get it going again. And at some point, you just don't have that phone call where you get an old piece of hardware that saved the day.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, just as along with people in general, change is always difficult. Upgrading is difficult. Learning new things. No one really wants to. I know how this works. Why do I want to learn something new? But there are very good reasons for it.
Right. So you're sort of touching on the risks with that, and I feel like every day it gets worse, right? So a lot of facilities that were I find a lot of facilities that I visited, they were maybe very early adopters into automation and really sort of bought in early on with really huge capital investments. I don't know whether they didn't amateurize it or ever plan on an update strategy for continually doing it. But nonetheless, there's facilities making things to be competitive now in this global economy where now there's just no room to move those along. And I guess where I'm trying to drive to is, what are the ultimate risks of continuing to bury your head in the sand? Is eBay a viable option? Is keeping these things going with repair, when does it stop? Are we there, or is it still a solution maybe for a little bit and for some people?
Yeah, what's a high-risk item off eBay, for example? And tell you the truth, it's a high-risk item if it's on their shelf in their own spares, and I'm talking about a drive, that's been sitting there for more than 3 or 4 years. Internal components at that level, large capacitors, that's the primary. The large capacitors actually degrade over time, and especially if they had not had voltage on them. A lot of people overlook that, but you pick up any large drive manual and there'll be conversation about forming the capacitors or reforming the capacitors. And it'll tell you if this has sat on the shelf for X number of years, usually 3. Sometimes it's if it's been on the shelf for 2 years, do this, 3 years, do this, 4 years, do that. Very
You're talking
specific.
about a rewarming of those capacitors, a procedure like that.
A forming of the capacitors. Otherwise, you can actually damage them on a full line voltage power up. So here, the risk of buying anything off eBay, well, what's the chances whoever sold it had it on the shelf for 5 years and said, we're never going to use this, and they sell it? In the buyer's mind, that's a brand new item, and it could be in the box unopened. But there's issues, there's risk with buying the old stuff. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
So you're saying even if you can get a hold of that, you're still looking at potentially a repair.
Could be.
Yeah, I see on the automation side, I see even, not necessarily just eBay, but I see on some sites they have peel automation parts listed that have been repaired. There's, and they say they've been tested, but anytime you've got a 30-year-old PLC part that's been repaired, when did it get repaired? How long has it been sitting there? Like he said, so you're gambling with your production on that. And I know for most people out there, they probably measure downtime in thousands of dollars per hour at least. So when we talk about, hey, well, I'm good with this, or hey, I don't want to spend the money now or something. You got to think about what happens when you call that eBay place or wherever and they say, oh, we ran out, we don't have any more. Think about how long it's going to take to re-engineer your system to get you back up and running when you can't find that part.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be expensive.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because I think if I was a facilities manager, if I was someone that had some cash flow, I'm trying to hang on to it with current economic times, and unfortunately, with some businesses not making it, the ability to get third-party components may increase here for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a viable? Or I think that would be one of the things I would be considering, right? And maybe a step in that is, how long do I want to keep this line or this machine running? If it's another 6 months to a year, because I've already looking at a larger capital expenditure to replace it, then maybe that is viable. But to your point, if that's what's keeping the lights on in the facility, can I handle being down for the 6 months when it's gone?
Exactly. So you have to take that in consideration when you weigh the cost of upgrading and modernizing.
Yeah, I had a customer tell me, you start out asking, I've got this failure, I need to make this work, what's the right thing to do? And it was an old drive, it was a 10-year-old drive, and it was an easy replacement for a new drive solution. But he goes, this machine literally only has to run for 6 more months. Immediately I thought, oh, well, wait a minute, okay, I think I've got this Band-Aid for you. So it's important to know what the customer expects path forward out of that machinery.
I can appreciate that stress, because I've been in that situation. Do I share this as an option because you're concerned, is it the next time? Because sometimes when you can pull the rabbit out of the hat, so to speak, for a situation, is the lesson learned that this product is still available? I don't know that we convey sometimes to the nth degree where we literally go looking under rocks for parts for customers on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know it happened for me once a week in the best of times as a specialist. Hey, I've got this old 611 drive and I need a card for it. Well, we can buy one from this customer, but then we have to move it through the repair department at Siemens, and then we have to get another component from eBay over here to hopefully stick two together. And sometimes we don't want the customer to care, right? Like in our case, we just want to take care of it. But the lesson to the end user is, it was an extra week's lead time, but we got it taken care of, and they don't necessarily know some of those pains that we're seeing on a regular basis. Now, another risk here, and this was an interesting thing, and I didn't brief you guys on it at all, but I kicked this over when doing some research on this. And some people are perceiving risk and trying to keep obsolete hardware going and not willing to replace it because of the hazardous waste in replacing it. So literally the graphical image was a dumpster full of components, and it talks about the fact that there's leads and other materials and batteries, and there's things. So a lot of the technology, to use your vocabulary, Howard, a lot of the technology that we're trying to replace is borderline hazardous waste. And I'm even seeing where a lot of places are trying to donate it to schools. Schools no longer want it. What do you do with this stuff? Do you guys know? I mean, are there recycling places for this? Have you kicked any of that over? Because I didn't follow that through, and I apologize for blindsiding you with that. But
I believe that there are a few places out there. I've heard that will recycle computers, technology, computer CPU boards, and stuff like that. So I think there is an outlet for recycling that in a safe manner besides just throwing it in the dumpster.
Yeah, my impression when I first came across it was that seems like a really good excuse to not deal with the inevitable right now. But then the more it sat on me, especially as we've been talking, I thought, well, is there some legitimacy to that concern? And yeah, I probably ought to follow up or look into that, or at least we should, in case there's some questions or follow up with it later. So, what are my benefits? You know, what's in it for me beyond? I'm 3 days from retirement. I'm not going to be in this facility past 6 months. I don't care, as long as it runs when my foot gets out of the door, right? That's a real thing, because
Yes.
you guys know that a lot of times the people in a facility that have the power to make the decision have worked their way up into a managerial type position, and they are literally looking at the finish line and not necessarily caring about all of that extra work. So beyond getting rid of old stuff, what's in it for me? Why would I change?
Well, I mean, if you're very close to retiring, then it's a hard sell to convince you, other than your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? But as far as technological benefits, I mean, yeah, from the automation standpoint, processing capabilities is going to be through the roof compared to a PLC from the 80s. The things you're going to be able to do, the things you're going to be able to make your machine do, the diagnostic capabilities of modern automation is light years beyond what we had in the 80s.
Yeah, and you should expect more uptime. As things get older, you power them down, you power them back up. There's quite a few people, they're saying a little prayer right there on the power up. Hey, it comes up, okay, walk away. As things age, especially as they use more power, high power stuff, there's risk on power up. And of course, sometimes power goes down unexpectedly. So to me, you're looking at obsolescence. Okay, it's typically technology driven. There's new things out. But if you've opened your eyes to the fact, okay, we're going to be installing some new stuff, in my opinion, you should expect better performance, better uptime, easier changeovers, less risk on power down, power up, stuff like that. I mean, most all the drives now have surge protection, if you will, on the way in. Current limiting resistors on the power up, things like that. You don't even know they're in there. So there's I don't want to say everything, but as technology evolves, the little things get integrated into it that you may not even know. It just makes it a more robust piece of hardware. So expect better uptime and expect higher performance. Instead of just changing things out, say, okay, we're going to change these out. What more performance can I get? Can I get more speed? Can I get more feedback of data onto a network that can now go to a supervisory system that was too hard to screw with on the old drives? Well, I can tell you now, it's pretty easy to get almost anything you want from a drive, from all the control systems.
Mm-hmm. With automation systems, you know, what everybody wants now is more data, more and more data, key performance indicators. We can get that out of a modern PLC system very easily. And to Kevin's point and your point earlier about, hey, you know, a lot of times these PLCs have been on for years and they've been off for about 2 months now. The thought that went through my head was, man, I hope their backup battery is good. Nowadays, there are no more backup batteries with
Right.
anything to eliminate that kind of problem. So, I mean, and I get the argument I get a lot is, man, I don't want to have to train my guys on the new stuff. But what they don't understand is a lot of times that new stuff is so much easier than the old stuff. You know, I grew up, I'm a Siemens guy. I grew up on S5, and compared to TIA Portal, oh my gosh, it's light years of difference. So,
Yep. Yep. And kind of to your point about somebody close to retirement or been there long enough, let's say they've got 1 or 2 years left still, but let's say the folks coming up behind them didn't grow up in the trenches, keeping the machinery running, never had anything to do with installing machinery. And you know you're walking out the door in a couple months, but you got an upgrade possibility on the table in front of you. I've seen it where the in-house folks don't have the time to do a large upgrade. They want to. The facility wants to. They know they have to. Technology has evolved. They want to put new drives in, let's say, just for an example. Let's say it's 10 drives on a web machine. Has to happen in-house. They've really got the talent, but they don't have the time to focus on all the as-built drawings, make sure they're as-built, evaluate the replacement technology, evaluate how it's going to wire in, how it's going to run, what programming needs to change to make it work, and then all the final as-built drawings after the fact so that there's a real live document to document that machine after the fact. Okay, so, and you're out the door in a couple years. What if an integrator gets used? We see this all the time. It's the right thing to do in a lot of scenarios. So you pay an integrator to participate in the upgrade. The integrator throws 3-4 people at it. They do everything the right way. When it comes time to upgrade the hardware, we make sure the integrator includes the in-house maintenance folks and management so that everybody participates on that upgrade. Up and running, all the documentation now happens because the integrator was paid to do it, so it will be a deliverable. It's going to be accurate. The machine's running already. Everything's great. Now, when you're looking, let's say it took 6 months, 8 months to get to that point. Now you're a year away from retirement. You're going to feel pretty good about walking out of that scenario. And the folks left behind now have a new skill set, if you will. They went through that upgrade. So what's the benefit? That's a big one.
Yeah. Howard, you said something that it sparked a memory of a conversation that I had with, I'm almost sure it was Jeff Weaver. I hope if I'm wrong about that, I know it was one of you automation folks. But it was an interesting comment that talked about, 10 years ago, every college was pumping kids into IT and computer programming. And while there's still certainly a market for that, not everyone really liked that environment. So there's a bunch of people with a different type of programming language knowledge that isn't necessarily compatible with that of the older automation systems, right? So when I came up through those 80s and 90s, it was ladder and pretty much machine code, and the new thing was ladder, which was easier than the machine code stuff, right? So your 5 had STL, and then the fact that I could do the ladder was great. So a very common thing now that you're seeing in new hardware is you're seeing some of those other languages that would have been more associated with PLC type stuff. And I don't want to rattle them off, but I guess what I'm saying is, to your point about new hardware and who can actually support it, that may be a benefit as well. Your pool of people to keep your technical facility going may be larger because of the additional programming languages, and you being able to use structured text or even C++ in a new PLC where that might not have been supported, at least without additional licensing in some older hardware.
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm in. You sold me on this. Where do I begin, Howard?
I think you want to evaluate the equipment that you have. You want to evaluate your spare parts. hopefully you have some spare parts. You want to take a look and prioritize and say, hey, what are my critical spares? What are my non-critical spares?
Right, and maybe to Kevin's point, are they good? Even though I've had it, has it been? Is there a quarter inch of dust on it? Maybe even though it's been on my spare shelf, it sounds like you might want to have that sent out for repair so that capacitor can be reformed, or do some bench testing to make sure it's actually ready for you in the time of need, if you have it.
Yes.
So is that for everybody, or do you think there's some validity to an end of life with the line or the machine? Is there a point where you say, okay, let's just keep putting Band-Aids on this baby? You know, how does someone help wage that?
I've seen some good justification on a very defined method on how they're going to upgrade. So this was with DC drives, and a couple large drives and a bunch of smaller drives in the panel. They wanted to go to the new DC drives and came up with a strategy on, okay, we're going to upgrade this machine. We're going to take those drives out. We're going to put them on the shelf. We're going to use this as our new line. We're going to keep track of the drives we put on the shelf. And at some point, we're just going to go ahead and swap them in on the other line that's still the old drives and get more life out of that line. And it had to do with product that they were going to run on one line versus the other line. So there was a reason to keep using the old stuff, but at the same time, they were getting familiar with the new stuff and running the new product on the new stuff. If I remember right, they added some very specific feedback into that line with tension and thickness control and things like that. Where the old line,
to add benefit that you were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was with them 100%. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I will support you on everything you're doing there to when it's time to bring the old stuff back in, let's focus on what software that's going to require, what parameters were needed for that line and that kind of thing. And then essentially, okay, there for a bit of time, you've got two different age lines. But I tell you, if there was ever a catastrophic failure on the old stuff, they already had a leg up on being familiar with the new stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've done that in the automation world as well. I've had a customer, they had a lot of remote I/O in their facility, and they did evaluate their current stock, and they realized that they were running low on a certain kind of I/O card, and they said, well, we want to upgrade some of our I/O, but we're going to identify this rack of I/O because it's got the most of that card that we're running low of. So when we modernized that remote I/O rack, they had 5 more spares that they knew were good. So
to help support some of the other machines and lines in the facility. So they were almost developing their own cannibalized parts rather than relying on eBay. That card was working. I can have more faith in it now versus buying from a third party.
Exactly. And at the same time, they began the modernization process.
Right. So both of you sort of listed scenarios there that were modular in essence, or a small piece of a total facility, but they sounded rather inclusive to, or at least that there was a very clear line, or inclusive to a machine, or maybe a couple of machines, or a whole line or process. How feasible is it in most scenarios to tackle even a smaller piece of that? I guess what I'm saying is, can I just go after a PLC safely? What about the old drives? Because I'm thinking about some potential breakpoints there for a customer in communications, safety requirements, right? Because sometimes that changes when you start upgrading your line of acceptability or acceptable behaviors of a machine changes, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. Is that more or less where you feel like the line is a little more involved, or are you seeing smaller steps than that?
It depends on the amount of downtime a customer is willing to take on. Oftentimes, not every customer is willing to take their machine down for 2 weeks to strip every PLC, every remote I/O, every drive out and drop it in brand new. Ideally, that would be perfect. That would be so easy to integrate new PLCs, new drives, new remote I/O, new HMIs, and everything. But a lot of times, that's not going to be an option for a customer.
Right.
So you have to us and whatever integrator you get involved, we can talk and debate on what we do with that. I know in the past when I was an integrator, oftentimes we debated, hey, are we going to replace the drives first, or are we going to replace the PLCs first? And again, communications, like you said, becomes an issue, because the older drives were not going to talk to the newer PLC over the new bus protocol, that, Profinet or Profibus, so we had to come up with a way to do that. So a lot of times customers.
So would you use like a gateway or something in the middle? Like for us, we commonly use Siemens has some, and we may use like a Redline data station or something. But was that your at least your temporary fix?
In that case, the temporary fix was we left the old PLC in there. The old PLC communicates to the old drives. I dropped in a new Siemens PLC, and the Siemens PLC was able to talk to the old Siemens PLC. Yeah, so that's how we did it. Other times, when it's just an automation aspect, do you replace the remote I/O first? Do you replace the PLC? Those are things that you can check and balance. And the key thing is that you do not. A lot of times, some people think, oh, I got to replace everything at once. I'm going to be down for a month or whatever. A lot of times we can work around the outages. We did a big job for an aluminum plant, and we replaced all the drives and PLCs in one process line, and it took us over 2 years to do it, because they were down for 12 hours every other week and down for 7 days twice a year. And we were very methodical, and we planned everything out on how we were going to replace what, how we were going to do it, and we had a backup plan in case things were going bad. Can we roll back and go back to the old drive and stuff like that? So we can do that. It will take longer. It will be slightly more expensive than doing a complete replacement, but in the long run, they saved that money. They saved that downtime. They never lost production time doing that upgrade. It just took a long time.
And potentially you're increasing risk too, right? Like if it's taking you 2 years, you're trying to get an obsolete part out, you're now living with that for 2 years.
Right. Yes, but also goes back to the same line of when we replaced that drive, then they had one more drive spare that they could go
Sure. Yeah.
And you knew that it was working.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I had a little bit of an opposite scenario. So working with a customer, we'd been working on the planned upgrade for about 3 months. And they were probably a month away from physically doing it. And they called me up and said, okay, remember what we've been talking about? I just had one of my old drives fail. I want to go ahead and move just the variable frequency drive in right now, but not do the rest. Can we do that? And everything else, of course, was designed on a Profinet solution, talking to everything. His old system was, it was a field bus, but he had the option to go analog to the drive. So we went ahead and dropped in the brand new Siemens drive it happened to be with a control unit. It's Profinet control unit, but you just set it up and configure it for analog input. And one day he was up and running. So now he's sitting there running with the analog control. Everything about the machine is still old. And then he called me up and said, okay, that was great. That's running. Now let's talk about when we're going to do the rest of it. And actually, I got a call today. They're working on that configuration right now.
Yeah, and 3 former lives ago, actually, when I kind of kicked off into this, I worked in the group was called an improvement group, and essentially it was kind of like a step up from your maintenance. So we did a lot of time, we did welding and everything. We made our own machines from scratch, but a lot of times we literally had a little cart that was like our desks, and we'd sit behind machines when we were retooling them, and we did everything at breaks and at lunch. So it was a lot more labor intensive, but there was no real impact, right? So I guess what I mean by that is even in the code, we would first set some internal bit or something where you could turn on half of the logic and turn off half of the logic. Yep. So they would go to break, you hear the buzzer, you'd turn your bit on, you'd run around, you'd test whatever you did, figure out what you did, and then before they came back from break, you came back and toggled it the other way. and voila. And it's funny, while they were gone, you were drilling and tapping 2 holes, and then at the next break you were mounting the bracket, and then it was just it was a little bit, I guess the point to that story is that mindset, while maybe on the extreme side of things, really still does apply here. If you're really interested in upgrading and preparing your facility for the future, it sounds like it's not as bad as a lot of people make it out to be, although the tendency is. And I notice with my old age that even when I look at projects at home, I would like to do new flooring in the kitchen. But if I do that, I don't like the island. And if I'm going to go after the island, the cabinets are a problem. And if I pull those out, I might as well go ahead and do the paint. And then now my appliances don't match, so I need new of those too. And you know what? Just never mind. And I think honestly, in all of the reading I did in prep, that is sort of what's happening here. I think people are seeing this such a big animal rather than the small little bites that they can take off at a time.
Absolutely.
And I would say that's a big place where we can certainly help. And even to Kevin early on mentioned adding integrators, and I think that's valid because to your scenario and then the extreme version of it where I talked about that, Howard, where it took you 2 years to do an upgrade and you plan it and you Gantt chart it out. It's nice if you have an integrator because you can on demand add labor to get a lot more done in those 2 days. You might actually be able to do some mechanical rebuilding and some other things when you have that little window to be able to get a lot of people on it, where you don't need that staff all the time, right? I mean, you got 6 months to prepare for the next 2 weeks, but when the 2 weeks happens, we need 20 people.
Absolutely.
Right. That's interesting. So the segue into the next place I kind of wanted to take the conversation we've already been on for a bit, that was creating a strategy. And what might be a resource, or how would people, where would you say to begin? Let's say someone has acknowledged, I see the benefit, I want to add safety, I want to get performance, I want to do one of those things, and I know those products are a part, but I'm not quite sure how to take that small bite. Where do I start, guys? Oh, yeah?
I'll go first. I think you definitely want to talk. You can start talking to your distributors. Your distributors would know those products really well. They would be able to help you identify, hey, these are something that's going to go away in 2 years. Oh, this thing is going to go away in 5 years. You got some time on this. They can help you begin that analysis of, hey, these are things you got to worry about right now. These are things you can wait on. And you can go from there. I know some of the manufacturers that we work with, they actually have programs where they will come in and do an audit of your facility from top down, and they will catalog every part number that you have, and they'll run an analysis and say, hey, this is dying, this is gonna die, this is gonna go away, you have to do something now, or oh my god, you should have done something last year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to start with a walkthrough too, I would say. So many times you can go to the drawings, you can go to the prints, and it gives you an idea of what was put in there day one. But if we're talking about stuff that's 10, 15 years old, you got to go out and look in the panels, and that's where it makes sense to have your distributor, somebody who's familiar with the product that's available today, and then take a look at that. I had a walkthrough out in Terre Haute not too long ago, and it wasn't new equipment, but everything was spick and span, clean, place looked great. What makes the equipment look newer, if you know what I mean? And I pointed out to him, I said, okay, you know what, it's not a big deal, but if those motor modules go out, you're going to get one in replacement that looks a little bit different, but it's not a big deal. But here's what you're going to expect, and you are going to have to change the connector on the end of the cable, for example. Not a big deal unless you forgot to buy the connector for the end of the cable. So a walkthrough is worth a lot. So I think that's key. So you got to do your walkthrough, you got to take your time, you got to be detailed, and you got to end up with a summary from your analysis on what's existing, what is the replacement recommendation. Okay, now what are the implications of that firmware, software, program control, network interface.
And maybe even know up front what kind of budget are we looking at here,
There you
right?
go.
I mean, if you're
Exactly.
if you're in a very a competitive market or economy with your parts, you might not be able to go after a bunch, right? Whereas, hey, I'm looking 20 years down the road. I'm ready to invest back in the business. I think that could be a very different thing, right?
Yeah. And then from the automation standpoint, something I always try to stress to the customer is to get those backup programs from the integrator or the OEM. I know that's tough sometimes. Sometimes the OEM is very protective of their code and they can lock out the code. But I had a customer here recently. He was like, hey, we bought all this equipment from this OEM overseas and they're going bankrupt. They're going out of business. What can I do? And I said, well, we can do these things, but if we had the program, you're good. They're like,
Right.
We're going to work on that.
Yeah, that is tough because of the global economy and machines being copied or duplicated in other countries and everything. You see more and more machine builders really protecting their IP. They're wanting to make sure that the investment that they've done in a process or a machine is protected, and I can respect that. But you do see a lot of these machine builders and things go out of business, and then it leaves a facility that's running on hardware. That's a whole other topic, really, of how do you deal with, I don't have the program and I need to upgrade this. Like, that's actually everything we've talked about could be a big point of we need to make something in tandem versus being able to upgrade this.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are things to consider because so those older PLCs that are out there, they don't store the comments in those older PLCs. So a lot of times, yeah, you can go out and suck the program out of it, but without those comments, you're just driving around without any street signs. So that's really tough to get anywhere.
Right. So I would say they're not dead in the water, though, right? I mean, they're going to have to really explain, and maybe it's even another place for an integrator to come in and help out, or we get a solutions provider or somebody like that. That's the vocabulary we often use for that. But if they can define their process, since we could potentially be changing so much anyway, you're not necessarily dead in the water on a project, right? I mean, is it still plausible to ground up it?
Oh yeah, it's very plausible. It would just be tougher. It's just going to be a little bit tougher without the street signs, but we can still get from point A to point B eventually.
Yeah, we just don't have the navigation blue line, you're saying.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Well, Kevin, you said something very, very early on in this session, and it talked about resources. And I agree with you that a lot of times a distributor or all of the specialists, we have our inbox filled with this part's going away. And sometimes it's with some of our vendors anyway, the notification is so far out that you tend to even not pay attention to it yourself because some will notify you that we're going to end this. We're going to start ending it in 2 years, and then it's really going to be gone 10 years after that. And then others say, hey, we're thinking about being done with this product, and then they kind of keep making it forever until one day it's not available. And then you have other people that just one day it's not available. and you're completely blindsided, right? So even for us, I would say we sit pretty well with that, but that's I think the nature of our role. We're trying to work on behalf of our customers and stay on top of those things, but really there's not any extra tool there that a customer themselves, or at least I don't know of a scenario that a customer couldn't sign up for, right? So if you've got products that we sell here, not necessarily as a plug, but if you've got Tolomatic or Siemens or any of those, all of the things that I can think of, at least with us, any customer could sign up for those notifications. Are there any that would rely on us?
Solely? No, I don't think so. I think
I don't think so. It's pretty
most of
open.
the manufacturers are good about publishing information like that.
Yeah. Now it ebbs and tides with organized methods of sending out cancellation. It's like, oh, great, here's this avenue they're using. This is great. And all of a sudden, it just doesn't happen that way anymore. So keeping in contact with the manufacturers, I think, is key. That's our role, as I see it. But to your point,
Yeah.
I think anybody can go online and try to be part of the mailing list.
Well, I just worry that, I know with any of the products we sell or we represent, we're happy to help a customer with what that looks like as a group. That's very much our role with C&E. But I do become, I don't know what that looks like when you're talking about products outside of that, right? There's other PLCs and products that we don't, and then it could become very challenging for a customer to organize all that. Do you know of other third-party resources that specialize in that, or would that be your tactic, is just to dive in?
I don't know of any third-party resources. I think you'd have to dive into each specific manufacturer and get in contact with them, get on their mailing list. Not everything is spam. Not every spam is bad.
Well, and
weed through all that.
I guess that's another thing, right? With all the emails, you can accidentally take yourself off the list. Pretty easily on that.
Absolutely.
Well, do you guys, do either of you have extra thoughts before I head over to Jeremy for any questions out there?
I'd have one thought that it comes up every so often with a customer. I would just caution customers. Sometimes they look at manufacturer A, and they had manufacturer A from the 80s, and they're getting ready to do an upgrade. They've gone through all this, and they say, okay, we got to upgrade. And they've been with manufacturer A. They've had manufacturer A in the plant since the 80s. And manufacturer B comes along and says, hey, look at our 2020 version of an automation system. And they go, that looks so cool, I'm going to go with it. And I always encourage people to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Don't compare an automation system from the 80s from one manufacturer with a modern automation system from another manufacturer. Make sure you compare what that automation that a manufacturer has for the 2020 with the other guys from 2020. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. That's the only thing I've seen in the past. Some people kind of go, well, I didn't like what they did in the 80s, so I'm going to go with this other customer or this other manufacturer for their 2020 version of the software.
Yeah.
And maybe even a better question is, where is the company's, where are their values, and where are they trying to put themselves 10 years from now?
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I think that may be a valid question as well, when you're making those decisions for upgrade components. Because in all honesty, if you're jumping 20 years, which is what you're talking about now, if not more, right? 20, 30 years you're jumping, potentially. Everything's moved on enough that I don't think it's a huge advantage to stay with any manufacturer. You're leaping so many software and hardware platforms that you're pretty much, I don't think it's a big difference to stick with one versus another. So who's going to support you with it? Who's going to make sure that you're going to be successful, both from a manufacturer and a distributor level, I think are valid questions to evaluate.
Yep.
Yeah, even within the same manufacturer, I know from experience, I've walked into facilities and they've said, I had a terrible experience with that particular manufacturer 15 years ago. And I look at the application and think, well, there was no reason to have a bad experience, but I understand that you did. I can look at it and go, okay, I see where somebody went wrong on, that's not the right way to have done that. So it made life more complicated. But you roll forward, and really the software package that I'm introducing to them is so different compared to what they're comparing it to. It's not even the same software package, not the same platforms, not the same way to communicate. Everything is different. Right. And it's the same manufacturer.
Yeah.
And things are going to go better this time, I promise.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Jeremy, any questions out there?
Well, Jay, while we're waiting on questions to come from viewers, a couple come to mind. What's a manufacturer's role in helping me upgrade? Should I expect the manufacturer to be proactive, or is that something I should be reaching out to the manufacturer to figure out when I need to upgrade?
I'll pass this through the guys, but I'll first jump in with, I would say at a manufacturer's level, they need to be communicating in one mechanism or another, whatever their planned obsolescence is. So when they have a part, the moment they know it, and as soon as they can predict it. One of the things I know, there's been changes in the past, but and I'll say this manufacturer by name. I think Siemens actually does a very, very good job, almost to the point where it's ignored. When people are blindsided by a Siemens obsolescence, in most cases, someone let them down. Maybe it was us. Maybe we didn't let you know. Maybe you weren't aware. But I can tell you, Siemens is that example of 2 years or a year on the late side. They are putting things on the soon we're going to discontinue this. So you have 2 years before they discontinue it. And then beyond that, their benchmark, and it's not always 100% because of things like I explained earlier in my scenario where we bought $300,000 worth of hardware, but they try to stockpile and ensure that they can support it fully for an additional 10. That's their benchmark. So you're talking about 11 to 10 years from a notice of something going obsolete. To me, that is plenty of time. If a customer is getting let down by that, someone, either they were ignoring the notes or someone frankly let them down. They should have been notified. And even if that was us, I apologize to any customer that would have happened to. They should have been aware. But as far as their obsolescence, things change for them too, right? Recently, I know Siemens has had a lot of changes in their HMIs lately, and as has every other manufacturer. So everybody wants to point at these vendors like they're doing something wrong, but a big shift happened. And our TVs used to be on a 4:3 aspect ratio. And then all of a sudden they went to a 16:9 aspect ratio. And then we all got these little devices, our phones, and they have this pinch zoom feature. And now I want that too. And I want different interface. Well, those are different screen technologies. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't care who your manufacturer of an HMI is. A really good production year of HMIs is nothing compared to the consumer market on making screens. Mm-hmm. And they were, as a manufacturer, they're making parts, they're sourcing things too, right? You're saying our customers are buying HMIs, they're buying PLCs and IO cards and drives. That's their component. But the manufacturers, Banner, Turk, Siemens, they're buying the next level. They're buying chips and screens and plastic bezels, and they're buying that next piece. Those manufacturers are dealing with obsolescence. So it's just this sort of trickle down thing. When those big changes happen, it forces it, and sometimes it is on an accelerated obsolescence path. I think this goes back to the rather recent piece of conversation where Howard was saying, where Howard led with it. Look to where they want to be in 10 years. Look to who you're going with. What's their history on giving you an upgrade path? Has that company been good, or have they not? Is their strategy to not really do anything and just charge you more until the pain is so great that you're whipped into buying the next product? And I don't know what's right or what's wrong there, but I think there's a lot of manufacturers that do their best to keep things stable because no one wants to deal with the pain with a customer to say you can't buy that anymore. They just want to take orders, in all honesty, right? They just want to sell you a product. So if you understand that, that's where it's at. I think more responsibility runs on it's your facility. You're making the parts. You need to keep it going. And I said earlier, C&E tries to be a partner with you, but that's a partner relationship, right? So I don't know. I don't think the manufacturer has much more than to make sure that they're notifying you well. What do you guys think?
I think a manufacturer does have a little bit of a responsibility to make sure they don't roll out the next generation of PLC or drive without having all the components that will replicate the functionality of the older equipment. And I think most manufacturers do that. I think sometimes things fall, some obscure parts that only 2% of the plants in the world use this one functionality. They're not going to carry it on to the next generation. I understand that. But for the most part, they need, before they obsolesce something, they need to make sure that the next generation can do the equivalent functionality. I think, and most manufacturers do. Most manufacturers that we deal with do. But I think that is one of the responsibilities, and also to provide so to provide, like you said, that upgrade path, but also a way to help facilitate that. So I know like Siemens, they make they have a converter application to get you from S5 to S7, and then once you're in S7, you can go to Portal and stuff like that. So they do help you with those things. They provide you with the tools to get you from the 80s to the 2020s.
Yeah,
you are touching on something there that's important, though. An upgrade path to the next thing. It can be hard when you're jumping 2, 3, 4 generations, and you might not be able to get those middle steps, right? Because they're now obsolete too, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of an example. I've worked with a number of customers, and due to acquisitions and other things that happened with this manufacturer, there was no path from version A software to the new version. Well, we have integrators, though, who are familiar with the old stuff, and they know how to write the new stuff, and they actually had to hire the integrator to be the conversion tool. Back to what you were saying earlier, though, as long as they know what the process needs to do, that integrator knocked it out and got them up to the new platform. Now they're on new drives, new motors, new controls, just new HMIs.
Nice. What else, Jeremy?
Well, staying on this topic, it seems like the onus is on me quite a bit to understand when my line is going to be obsolete, the parts I'm using. But what if I try to stay on top of these notices from the manufacturers, but I'm still somewhat unprepared? What's the best way? What's some measures I can take to make sure that doesn't happen?
I think for us, the best way is to make sure that you're talking to your TC, our sales team, our technology consultants are coming in. It's not all about just selling stuff. We do like to have a relationship, and we want to understand your processes, what's in the cabinets, so that we can be an extra set of eyes for you when that's happening. I know that's something we do quite a bit. I know we mentioned it. Howard said almost early on, sometimes it feels like the Grim Reaper, because that sometimes hasn't happened in a long time. And then when we finally get in, for whatever reason, then we're pointing out all these things all at once. But aside from that, is there's you want to have a lot of eyes on it, because it is tough, and all the email noise and all the things that happens, and some of those vendors that I say or manufacturers that do a very, very good job, sometimes they do such a good job you can ignore it. Like, I don't need to deal with that today. That's 10 years away, right? You guys have anything to add on that?
Just, if I see a drawing that says it's got a certain control unit on it, yeah, that's great. That's the latest stuff. But then walk around and open a panel, look at it. Oh, that's the old version of that. Didn't expect that. So that's relationship. That's walking around the place and being a bit involved with what's going on on the floor. One way or another, somebody has to look at the stuff and make a call on. No, that's fine. That's the new stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to take the time to familiarize yourself with the equipment that's in your plant, that's on our row and the customer's row as well. So sometimes the customer doesn't know what's in their machine. Sometimes, sometimes I have people call and they're like, "I'm having trouble with PLC." Well, what kind is it? I don't know. It's something from Siemens. Well, it could be a lot of things. So that goes all the way around.
And I think soon, we've been in a little bit of a weird time where plant visits and things haven't really been able to happen. But I think we're getting close to getting back to a little bit of sense of normalcy with that. So if it's a concern, or there's been some enlightening conversation here, reach out to your technology consultant, your salesperson. If you don't know who that is, call us at 1-800-228-2790, and our receptionist can kind of point you in the right direction. Out of respect for time and everyone's time, I'm going to wrap this up. But if I didn't get to any questions that we have out there, I'm not able to see the YouTube chat console. Jeremy's been manning that for me, but I'll make sure that Kevin, Howard, and or myself get back through all those, answer any questions that we see that pop up into that, since this is a live YouTube event. I think eventually we're thinking about these events making it into more of a podcast series where you can listen to it on iTunes or some of those other things where you get your podcasts, but we're still sort of in growing phase and sorting all this out. The next series, I'm not sure exactly when it'll be yet, but episode 3 of the Tech Table is going to be wired to wireless, where has communication been? Where is it now, and where is it going? Please join us for that. Make sure you smash that subscribe button so you get all our notifications when we're doing these. And I think that's it. Jeremy, anything to add as we exit this baby?
No, just hit that little bell and you'll get alerts too, so you know when we're publishing
Hit it
things
twice.
at CNE.
Hit it twice.
So we got a lot of great content to come.
All right.
Hey, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you, too, for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.